Welcome, Platinum Ambassadors, to our Platinum Ambassador Assembly 2022. I'm Anna Hyde. I lead the advocacy team for the Arthritis Foundation, and I am pleased to welcome you. 2 years ago, when we had this event, we had to turn the event from an in-person to a virtual in 72 hours. Many of you may remember that. If you are new to us, ask us questions afterwards. It's a really fun story. But Christopher Kush, who's here with us today, was really helpful in helping us make that transition happen. He is the president and CEO of Soapbox Consulting. He is the magic behind all the Hill meetings coming together. You will see him again at our opening session. But I thought to kick us off for this year's event, we might ask him a few fireside chat style questions about what life has been like in the past 2 years. Certainly none of us were used to virtual advocacy in the way that we've been doing it these last 2 years when we were expecting to be in person together in DC. And since then, Christopher has been navigating this new world that we're living in. And we thought it would be good to sort of probe him a little bit about what that has looked like and what best practices we may take away from his experiences. So Christopher, I will ask you first if you want to introduce yourself a little bit further, and then I love a bird's eye view of what life has been like the last couple of years.
Well, thank you, Anna. Well, I think I said this 2 years ago, but I miss seeing the Platinum Ambassadors. So that's what I miss. And so I hope I'm a friend and a colleague that helps do something helpful for your advocacy, sort of behind the scenes. Arthritis Foundation was the first organization that I saw that didn't just cancel everything, but decided really quickly to keep the conversation going, keep the information that had been prepared going out to the advocates, asking the advocates to stay home but still be active. So that was the beginning of these last 2 years. Now, we have done a lot of Zoom meetings, since then. So virtually, we've had to meet with our members of Congress, and that's been a little bit different. But I will tell you the thing that I feel about doing this is not that it's novel or new. So it's not that you don't feel like the fatigue, the Zoom fatigue or whatever it is, that you've done a lot of this. We're not doing something new here, but what we're doing is we're showing up because we have business in front of the United States Congress. So you can think of them as business meetings. We may or may not be sick of Zoom. Doesn't matter. We've got to talk to our elected officials. And so if this is the way we do it, it's a smaller subset of organizations that say, if this is how we've got to talk, then we're going to do it that way, versus backing out of the whole conversation altogether. So you're in a group that makes a statement by showing up.
So we're obviously doing our event virtually, as are many of our patient and provider partner organizations that we work with. But we know that some folks are starting to come back in person. And I'm curious, I have sort of twin questions here. One is, do you have a ballpark figure for how many virtual advocacy days you've planned in the last couple of years? And then the second question is, how is it now as organizations are starting to make that transition back to in person a little bit? How different is that versus the virtual and versus what it was like before?
So we've done, over the past 2 years, we've done probably 100 virtual advocacy days. So that's changing. But there's not necessarily a date when everything will be back to normal. So those of you, the Platinum Ambassadors, will know. Other advocates may not be aware, but the offices on Capitol Hill have a lot of leeway of how they conduct themselves. So once the public doors are open, again, they are not open yet, the individual offices will decide if they're taking meetings in person, if people have to be vaccinated. We saw during the State of the Union that the masks were off. So it's happening. And I will tell you, I will give credit to Congress in that the offices adjust fairly quickly to all kinds of challenges. And so people love to find fault with Congress, but really these offices really lean towards staying open, being accessible, and quickly finding a way. So it's happening. But for you, I don't think it's happening in time for you to be back in person. And so the important thing about all of this is that you're going to be talking about things as we move to the end of a Congress. So you're talking about legislation that really has to start moving down the road if it has a chance of passing. You're talking about funding that is a little bit behind, but that is still going to have to be completed by the end of the year. So so it's opening, and I have a list. We keep a list. We have 105 offices out of the 500 that are taking in-person meetings if you set them up. So it's coming, but it's not coming in time for your event. So the smart thing to do with your event, because of the timeliness of your information and your goals, is that you're really not worrying about it. You're not going to agonize over it. You're going to make sure you talk to these offices in time to impact the final product.
Mm. That's an interesting point. Have you seen any silver linings to doing things virtually? Because I know we talk a lot about Zoom fatigue, uh, and and one silver lining I can sort of think of is that we don't have to worry about Congress being in session. So when we set
Yeah.
this date, thinking that they would be, we then realize that they aren't in session, but yet we're still able to have this event. Because if it's virtual, it doesn't matter where you are.
Mhm.
Are there others that you've seen, or sort of culture shifts that you've seen, or just what to expect from staffers as our folks gear up for their meetings?
There have been. So, so one of the things for the advocates who are far away have been able to participate a little bit more through the virtual. So maybe if you live in a rural place, I think of northwest of the United States where you're far from an airport, and maybe it'd be more time and effort for you to get to DC. Those folks have been participating a little bit more. So that helps. With Arthritis Foundation, what I think of if somebody's in pain and if their mobility is limited, it does allow us to get those constituents in front of their legislative offices in a way that we might not have before. So there are some advantages with that. When you sit down with somebody, you get all this information, all this in-person information. It's a great way to influence people. There's something that happens in the energy of the room. But I have seen an advantage with the virtual meetings in that there's not a lot of time. There's almost no space for the kind of stuff we would spend, or we do spend a lot of time on the shaking of the hands. Hi, how are you? This office is nice. Yes, I know what's going on at home. There's something about the virtual meeting that gets right to the issue. That it's very quickly, it's like, what are we going to talk about? So you have this, you don't have many other avenues to go into for conversation other than focusing on your issues. But there's a challenge with that. And the challenge is, with noise and people being far from one another, it is helpful, if that preparation includes like little connections between everything, like, and now we're going to have a story about what a new treatment promises or what a new treatment costs. And so I'm going to hand it over to this person. That connective stuff, we've never had to do that before because we're sitting next to each other and we say, well, that's your story. So there's this verbal connection that has to happen. So that's the challenge, but the advantage is there's nothing else to talk about once you're sitting there all looking at each other wondering who's going to start speaking. It's like, let's talk about the issues.
Mhm.
So,
Oh, that's interesting. That's a good segue into what actually is my last question for you.
yeah.
And that is, if we are going to do you don't have to name names, but a little blooper reel, virtual meetings gone wrong, or just a handful of examples that you've seen or heard about that we can turn into lessons learned and best practices as we prepare for our meetings.
Well, by now, so the world is different now this year. So everybody has one way or the other, if only to see extended family, has figured out how to use Zoom. But the amusing things were the number of times that um, elected officials of a certain age um, called Soapbox, and we had to really help them because they were isolated from their staff. Help them like, this is the first time you've done this, isn't it? So at the beginning, that was kind of funny because we'd be like, Senator, please, we'd have to remember as we were giving instructions, the honorifics and all of that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So, there were, I mean, I do tell people there are several uh, members of Congress that are highly visible that we think we taught them how to do a webinar, so that was kind of funny, and kind of fun. There's a lot less of that now. So part of it is just getting your computer in the background to connect the camera and all that stuff. And so almost everybody has done the hard work of that, those first connections when you're wondering why it's not working. So I'm hoping we have a live help desk. So everyone's welcome to call. I promise I won't make fun of you. But it's been a relief that, people they're just getting right into the rooms a lot easier.
Mhm. So patience is a virtue,
Yes.
perhaps is one takeaway, and
Yeah.
tech failures will happen. The funny thing is, there's some connectivity points around the fact that we've all been using Zoom. I don't think there's a single one of us who hasn't accidentally been on mute, for example. Those things still
Oh,
happen.
for
It happened to
sure.
me
Right.
this
Exactly.
morning.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things maybe are things that we can, connect over. But I appreciate your sort of bird's eye view of what the last couple of years have looked like. Those are some really interesting nuggets and best practices that I think will help all of us to feel more comfortable, and we will see you again on March 21st and 22nd. Looking forward to it. And thank you so much, Christopher, for being here with us.
Thank you, Anna. I look forward to it too.